He had already freed her. He stood in front of witnesses. He signed the paper, declared that she and their children were no longer property. And she believed him. 9 years later, when he needed something else, he signed another document. Back into slavery. Back into inventory. He sold her. The price? 2,000 livres. The new owners? They were his own children. There are betrayals that happen in the dark, and there are betrayals that happen in daylight, signed, witnessed, recorded, and carried out anyway. This is not a story about confusion. It is a story about choice, about a man who believed he could control the law, control his children, and control the woman he had already claimed to set free. Because what happened next would not stay buried. Not then, and not centuries later. In the summer of 1764, everything in his household was being counted: furniture, land, livestock, and 9 enslaved people. Among them, Marguerite, pregnant. All right, this is how it went down. His wife had just died. Her name was Marie Jean Lacasse. She was 38 years old, and suddenly, the estate had to be divided. 2 sons-in-law demanded their portion, which meant everything had to be inventoried. Everything. And that's when Marguerite appears on paper. Not as a partner, not as a mother, as property. Pregnant property. In 1764, they were still living near the Gulf, along Fish River, in a region once anchored by what the French had called Massacre Island, now known as Dauphin Island, Alabama. His father, Francois, had arrived decades earlier, coming south from Montreal in the late 1600s. Francois established himself there. Land, trade, position. By the time his son came of age, the Guillory name already carried weight, and that son was Joseph Gregoire Guillory. Gregoire did not inherit poverty. He inherited standing, and he intended to grow it. When his wife died in April of that year, she left behind more than grief. She left behind heirs, their children, 8, and they wanted their share. 2 sons-in-law petitioned the authorities on behalf of their wives, which meant an inventory had to be taken. Everything counted. Everything assigned value. The inventory began on July 22nd, 1764. Signed, witnessed, resumed the next morning. Everything was itemized. A schooner of 20 tons, 600 piastres, 5 horses, 35 piastres, 4 guns, 18, salt, tools, tables, a trunk with its lock and key, 4 piastres, and then the people. Cupidon, 40 years old, 90 piastres. Jacques, 20 years old, 400 piastres. Jean-Louis, 22, 300 piastres. Charlot, 300 piastres. Catherine, 25, 200. Marie, 35, 300. And last, Marguerite, about 35, 400 piastres. More than the guns, more than the horses, less than the schooner. Pregnant, not with rumor, with Gregoire's child. That part was never disputed. But Gregoire understood something. Settlement required cooperation. So he assured his legitimate children that their mother's estate could be satisfied without selling the slaves or dividing them among their households. They would receive value. He would maintain control. And for a time, that arrangement held. But Gregoire was not a man who left outcomes to chance. He had satisfied the heirs. For now. He had preserved the household. For now. But proximity invited scrutiny. And scrutiny meant risk. So he moved. Fish River was no longer enough. Britain now held the land east of the Mississippi. French families were leaving rather than live under English rule. He petitioned for new land, gathered his household, gathered his enslaved labor, gathered his future, and he moved west, inland to the Opelousas Post, Louisiana. The land he moved to sits near what is today the Malay area in St. Landry Parish. 640 acres had been granted to him there. Rich land, interior territory, opportunity. And Marguerite went with him. She had no say in that decision. Opelousas was more than wilderness. It was organized. Commandant, land grants, hierarchy, law. And Joseph Gregoire understood law. He understood inheritance. He understood that land was secured through paper, and people were secured the same way. In this new territory, distance worked in his favor. Distance from the Gulf, distance from his wife's family, and for a while, distance from the sons-in-law who had demanded their share. Out here, the estate felt quieter, but it was not resolved. Marguerite began bearing children around the time they settled at the post. A daughter, Catherine, then a son, Jean-Baptiste, then Joseph, then Marie, 4 children, all fathered by the same man who owned them. This was not a hidden arrangement. Marguerite did not disappear into another cabin at night. She lived within his household, bore his children openly, raised them where his legitimate heirs could see them. There was a name for this, and there were consequences. Under the Code Noir, a free man who fathered children with his enslaved woman could be fined 2,000 pounds of sugar. He could be stripped of the woman, stripped of the children. They could be confiscated, removed from him. Unless he married her in the church, made her free, made the children legitimate. Joseph Gregoire did none of those things. He did not marry Marguerite. He did not lose her. He did not pay a penalty. He was not stripped of his children. Their blood tied them to him. The law did not. And in this household, the law was ignored. By 1770, the household had settled. The land was productive. The children were growing. The estate pressure had quieted. Gregoire had not paid anything. And he did something unexpected. He freed her. In front of a witness, he declared, over his ordinary mark, that Marguerite, his slave, was to have her freedom. Not only her, their children too. Catherine, Jean-Baptiste, Joseph, Marie, all named, all acknowledged. On December 31st, 1770, he put his promise in writing. I, Marguerite Guillory, citizen of Opelousas. He wrote that Marguerite had served him faithfully for 30 long years. Not only him, but his children, before and after the death of his wife. He said the promise came of his own free will. He granted freedom to Marguerite and her children. He demanded that they be respected, treated with love, given the rights permitted to free people. He promised she would be provided for, at least a year's support. He gave his consent publicly, authorized it to stand firm, to be enforced. But there was one condition. She would remain in his service until his death. For Marguerite, this changed everything. Freedom meant her children would not wake each morning as inventory. Freedom meant their names would be written, not just counted. Freedom felt solid. The paper mattered. Names mattered. Witnesses mattered. And this time, she had all three. By then, Joseph's legitimate children were no longer distant figures on the Gulf. They were in Opelousas, present, watching. For them, freedom did not erase debt. When Marie-Jeanne Lacasse died, her property did not become Gregoire's alone. It was divided. Half of everything, including the enslaved people, belonged to her heirs, which meant Marguerite was never his to free entirely, not without settling accounts. Accounts must be closed. Interests must be divided. Debts must be satisfied. 3 years passed since her freedom had been written in ink. Then in 1773, another document was drawn. It did not call her to stand beside him. It did not ask for her mark. It did not name her as free. It listed her among the assets to be conveyed. Marguerite and her 4 children. The heirs had waited nearly a decade for their portion of their mother's estate. Now the court required settlement. The Spanish authorities ruled in their favor. Half of the property would be transferred. Gregoire was compelled to comply, including Marguerite, including their 4 children. They were valued, assigned, transferred. The act placed a number beside them, 2,000 livres, half owed to the heirs of his first wife. And this time, the names beneath the paper were not witnesses to freedom. They were recipients, his legitimate children, the same sons who had signed the emancipation. Ownership changed hands. The law recognized it. And freedom, the one declared 3 years earlier, was not mentioned. She was no longer free. She had believed the first paper. The second one did not require her belief. The conveyance held. Marguerite remained under the authority of the heirs. So did her children. The 1770 emancipation was not revoked. It was simply not honored. For 4 years, that contradiction stood. The sons who had once signed beneath their father's mark now held legal authority over her, over children bearing names almost identical to theirs. Their own half-brothers, their own half-sisters. Children their father had called free. Gregoire was still alive. He watched the arrangement stand. The household did not erupt. There was no public dispute, no petition filed, no immediate rebellion. Life continued. The land demanded labor. The estate demanded settlement. And paper, once recorded, carried weight. They had heard the word free. Their names had once been written beside it, witnessed, recorded, spoken aloud. And then, without ceremony, that word stopped governing their lives. No decree announced its reversal. No judge revoked it. It simply ceased to matter. The estate settlement of 1773 did not ask what had been promised. It asked what was owed. The heirs had won, for now. But Gregoire was aging. His health began to fail. Time was turning against him. And when a man who has always held authority believes it is slipping from his grasp, he does not surrender. He reaches for what he fears losing most: control.